What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and in today's video we're going to be talking about I'm Still Here. Directed by Walter Salles, this film stars people like Fernanda, Torres, Selton, Mello, Fernanda Montenegro, and many more. And before we get too far into this video, if you like early reviews for movies like this, as well as things like retrospective reviews, live streams, and the occasional vlog, then you're in the right place. And I'd like to ask all of you guys to consider subscribing. But if you're a returning viewer, well, thanks so much for taking the time to come back to hear me talk about another movie. Now, today we're going to be talking about I'm Still Here, which is a film that many will consider a 2024 release. It did release in Brazil, where this film takes place, last year, as well as a couple other countries. It released here this last week in a limited theatrical release in the States, but only in a few cities across the country, and will be coming to theaters starting in February properly here in the States. I actually got sent an early screener for this film at the tail end of 2024, as it's definitely one of the bigger contenders I've heard about in the world of international films from 2024. But since it's coming to theaters in the States now in 2025, and I'm getting the chance to check it out now, I'm going to consider it a 2025 release for myself. But I know some people are going to consider it a 2024 release. I just wanted to mention that. But going into this movie, honestly, outside of the fact that it was an international film that I had heard of, I'd seen the poster of in discussions for films that I heard were pretty good, I honestly didn't really know too much about it. But then recently a coworker of mine named Valentina, who's actually from Brazil, actually saw the film a little bit early and said, hey, once this comes to the States, I highly recommend checking it out. It's a really solid, great film, and I think you should check it out and review it on your channel. So I was like, okay, cool. And then I remembered, I think I got a screener for this, but that screener had expired. So then I was like, all right, well, I'll just wait till the movie comes out. And literally just a few days later, I ended up getting a digital screener for the film again. So I was excited to be able to check it out ahead of its release here in the States. With all that said, I didn't go into it knowing what it was about, but I am going to talk about what it's about here in this review. So let's get into what this film's about, and then we'll get into my general thoughts. I'm Still Here takes us back to the early 1970s in Brazil, when unfortunately the government was going through a dictatorship, and so the military was taking it upon themselves to go around and just kind of abduct people. It was happening a lot to people in this time, and a lot of families were left with holes at the center of their families, a big void in their hearts. And this story in particular is based on a novel by a man named Marcelo Rubens Paiva, whose father, Rubens Paiva, was actually abducted by the military, and they never saw him ever again. And this film, in a lot of ways, while telling a true life story here, I kind of just opened my eyes in general to what was going on at this time. I won't lie, I'm not overly familiar with Brazilian history. I don't know much about their government, so I wasn't super aware of what this film was about. I didn't really know what the landscape, what the climate was like at the time. And so I looked into it just ever so slightly after having seen the film, and the film does kind of showcase that as well in the credits. But yeah, it's unfortunately something that was happening to so many people, and there were so many families that were absolutely gutted by this. There was this unfortunate sense of complete uncertainty when it came down to your family members. Sometimes people would get abducted by the military to be questioned about various things for days, weeks, months, and maybe randomly just reappear one day, and then many of which just never did. And so it left a lot of families with a sense of uncertainty. Are they still captured? Are they still being held hostage? Are they dead? When were they killed? Where's their body? And so this film in general focuses on one true life family that went through this specifically. And one thing right out of the gate to praise about this film is the cinematography and the overall filmmaking of the film. I thought when it came down to the look of the film, the tone, the cinematography, the sound design, all of that was top tier here, making for this film to really feel very realistic. I think in a world where we can have a lot of films with heightened experiences, or even films that tell true life stories that sometimes don't necessarily always have the most realistic tone to them, this film really, the best thing that immediately grabbed my interest was its realism. And a lot of that is really thanks to the cast as well. I leaned over to my wife not too long into this film starting up and going, immediately I'm gripped by how realistic these performances feel. Whether it be the adults, the teenagers, or the younger kids, all together, the cast works together to give us a family dynamic that feels real. And I live in an area that has a lot of tourists, and there's a lot of individuals specifically from Brazil or different places that speak Portuguese. And there was just an element about the families here that we were looking at and some of the characters that felt very much like many of the people that I come into contact with here in my local area. So there was definitely a sense of very tangible, realistic performances here that never felt like I was watching people act, which is one of the greatest things. I love when you can watch a film and you can be like, oh, this person's putting on a performance. extravagance. There's something theatrical about it, you know, because the film maybe calls for something like that. But a film like this that's supposed to be telling a real and dramatic story, I really appreciate when I can watch a film and my mind isn't even thinking about these people being actors. And I think that also helps from the fact that this is a, you know, all Portuguese speaking cast here. I'm not overly familiar with a lot of Brazilian or Portuguese centered films. So when it comes down to going into a film like this, there's no, you know, movie star outlook onto anything like this. I was able to just kind of take these people in as they were giving a performance. And again, I just really want to praise the cast here. I was completely enamored by how realistic their performances were. And a lot of the weight of this film lands on the shoulders of the actress Fernanda Torres, who plays Eunice Paiva, the wife to the man who's been abducted and is now missing. And she's got to play this really interesting character here, somebody who's a strong mother still to her children, somebody who wants to be there to continue to support the discovery of her husband, but also somebody who has to keep the ball rolling. There was a lot of uncertainty in this time for the people that were dealing with these kinds of situations. You have family members who they don't even know if they'll just randomly appear one day. They don't know anything about them. But you still got to pay the bills. You still got to take care of your family. And so you have this mother here who has to try to navigate continuing on a life while also having this giant void in her heart as to where her husband is or if he's even alive. And I think what this film does more than anything is not only show the terror of the idea of being abducted by your military and being killed and thrown somewhere and completely leaving your family in the dark, but more particularly the family, the idea of how many families were just as controlled by this situation as the people who were killed by having to live decades of life with so much uncertainty and so much darkness in their heart. And I just feel like this movie gave me a greater perspective of what that felt like for a lot of these individuals. This is a film that doesn't necessarily have character development across all of their characters. This isn't a film that's, I would say, is necessarily overly exciting to watch. It's not even a film I would say is overly entertaining, but it's a film that's incredibly well made, that captured my attention from beginning to end. The performances were incredible. What it's trying to say is incredibly real and tangible and raw. And ultimately, it's a film that left me really, really impressed by the way that the film was made in general. This isn't one of those films I can see myself revisiting too often, and there are a couple of moments that I think the film is a little bit slow, but I think this is the kind of film that needed to be slow. While I could find myself in a couple of moments feeling just a tinge of boredom, I ultimately was more impressed with how it all was handled, and I think it's a film that really requires you to kind of take time with the characters and have these quiet, somber moments that allow you to really just feel the emptiness of a situation like this, and I think that this film captures that really well. This is one of those films that I don't really have a lot of gripes with, because when I see a movie like this and I question what was the vision, what did they want to get across, and in my personal subjective mind, do I think they executed on that? And I genuinely think walking away from this film that I'm Still Here absolutely does that. This is the kind of film that gives you a great sense of realism, that gives you a peek behind the eyes of people that, you know, maybe you don't really personally know in your life, or you don't really come across this kind of situation often, but there are enough people who have gone through something like this to tell a story like this and allow us who have never dealt with anything like this to kind of, you know, get a peek behind the curtains and feel a sense of gratitude for maybe the things you've got in your life and the people you have in your life and the struggle that other people have had to go through. It gives you a sense of empathy, and I think that this film captured that all really well while telling a meaningful story that spans decades as well. Majority of the film takes place in that early 70s, but we do time jump a couple of times near the end of the film to show us kind of how this affected this family over the course of time, and kind of how answers would slowly start to trickle out as Brazil would move further away from that dictatorship. It's a very interesting film. It's incredibly well made. It's incredibly well acted, and I think it's a film that's certainly worth your time. Whether everybody loves it or not, I don't know, but if you look online on things like Letterboxd or Rotten Tomatoes, you'll see that the scores are incredibly high. I was actually incredibly surprised to see how high the scores were on Letterboxd before I watched the film. But after having seen the film, I can genuinely say I understand wholeheartedly why this is one of the films that people are praising the most in the international film race of 2024. As for films that are coming to the States now in the early part of 2025, I think this is one to look out for. I think this is the film people are going to be talking about by the time we get to the end of 2025 as well, in terms of the people who were not able to see it in 2024. So a big thanks to you guys for watching. That's going to be my thoughts on I'm Still Here. Certainly recommend checking it out. And if you were one of the very many people who got to check it out in 2024 and that's what brought you to this video, let me know what you think about it. If you haven't seen it and you're planning on checking it out, definitely leave some comments down below as well. And if you see this review and then you see the movie and you come back, I'd love for you to come back and let me know what you guys thought about this. Did you find this to be as impactful and incredibly well made as I did? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.